Welcome back to the Sports Management Podcast. This episode is sponsored by Esport Education and their new online course, The Foundation of Sport Business. With course modules delivered by sport business experts at companies like the NFL, the Football Association, and Formula E, the Foundations of Sport Business course equips you with everything you need to know to get on or accelerate your career in sport. And for you listeners, I have a great deal. With the code Sports Management Podcast 10, you will get 10% off the course price. Click the link in the description below and sign up to the course today. Now, let's kick off the episode. Welcome to Sports Management Podcast, where you will hear interesting sports management professionals share their stories, experiences, and passion for the sports management industry. I am your host, Marcus Philipsson. Today's guest is Dimitris Farmakis. Dimitris is an esports professional from Greece with a lot of international experience. After a decade in the market, Dimitris has worked as an analyst, tournament organizer, as well as roles within sponsorships, education, and much more. Dimitris and I talk about his career, the esports market, its evolution, and the projections for the future. I hope you'll enjoy this episode about esports. Dimitris Farmakis, welcome to Sports Management Podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
You are a esports professional from Greece. Can you elaborate a little bit what you do in your work?
Well, while I live in Greece, I have, for the last 6 years, I have been working in some projects abroad. Now I would consider myself an esports professional of the world or something of that sort. You know, lately, for the last 2.5 years, wow, time passes real fast. Anyway, I've been working with First Point Ventures, where I have been an esports analyst for them. I did market analysis, competitor analysis, any sorts of commercial analysis around the esports market. I have gained a lot of insight for myself and my employers. We have also worked to facilitate some sponsorships for some of the teams that we have worked with in the past. And in general, it has been a very wild and amazing ride on that regard. Yeah, most of my time in esports has been around, sponsorships, partnerships, trying to find win-win situations and things like that. So I would say that it has been amazing so far.
You have a lot of experience in a fairly new market, and you have already worked, you mentioned sponsorships, but also tournament organizations, some community management. Can you elaborate a little bit on these things as well?
I would say that my stint as a tournament organizer was more like in my earlier days. I have also worked in community management, both in Greece and abroad, especially as a Greek community ambassador for, at the time, streaming platform, which is no longer with us. But those formed the basis and gave me the foundation for me to find out what I wanted to do in esports, and then propelled me forward in the sense that I made some valuable connections through these activities that made my life a lot easier when I started looking for projects outside of Greece.
I also read that you will do some collaborations with a Greek university.
Yeah, education and esports as a whole, as a general category, and especially how esports can fit with education in a way that creates value for the students, for the universities, and for every party within that sphere, has been a very big passion of mine. And I am really happy to be given the opportunity to try things out and work alongside people from education in order to see how we can exactly do that with Greek students.
I see. So will this be a program that is focused on esports?
It's still in the early days, but I would assume that they will be doing other things as well. It's in the nature of the Greek universities to branch out and try to cover some areas. But I would assume and I would hope that esports has a prominent position in their research matter and studies.
And we're talking about esports in Greece, and you also said that you have international experience, but I wouldn't consider Greece a big country on esports, so to speak. So how has it been from your career to start in esports in Greece when you started working more internationally?
Well, we do have players that have been picked from teams outside of Greece. So there have been quite a few players that are now that now have international careers. So on a player level, things have been great for Greek esports, being recognized by clubs or esports teams and organizations abroad and getting picked for their teams. On an organizational level, things have stayed pretty much the same. I remember myself having the internal debate of whether to stay in Greece doing things in Greece or striking out and trying to find something abroad. In retrospect, I'm very happy that I did. It was very hard. And of course, since it's a new market, people most of the times are willing to onboard you, but the payoff is not much in regards at least to money. So it wasn't in the beginning. But on the other hand, I got enough experience and I met a lot of people that I sort of branched out my network and made it bigger. And as the time passed, I was exposed to more and more opportunities. So yeah, one can say that I put a lot of free work in, but now it seems that this is a time where all that free work, the skills acquired and the network can do the work for me.
I'm glad to hear that. We have talked a lot on this podcast about internships and maybe not take, I mean, as you said, working for free and gaining some experience will help you along the way later on.
You know, from my side of that argument, I can totally understand the value of internships. I would also, though, urge the people looking for internships and to gain experience in esports to really watch out who are they working for, because there have been a lot of instances that people have taken advantage of people that actually were new to the scene and were trying to build themselves a career or a reputation or anything. So you might be eager to jump into esports and to do the work, but you also need to be very conscious at any point and at any time of who you are working for and to watch out for every red flag that is out there that can show you that you might not be working for the right type of people.
Yeah, that's good advice. Looking at your career in esports, what do you see ahead if you can dream ahead?
There are a lot of things in esports for me yet. I can feel it, but I also need to honor my current engagements, both with First Point and Yieldly Finance. So I think that I'll be focusing on that for the time being and see what other opportunities are out there. But I will be announcing everything through LinkedIn because it's what I do.
We need to keep track of your LinkedIn to see where you're going. This episode is sponsored by Esport Education. Their courses equips you with everything you need to know to get started on or accelerate your career in sport. The course, The Foundation of Sports Business, is available now, and they also have a very interesting course coming up, Private Equity in Sport. As a listener of this podcast, you get 10% off both these courses using the code SportsManagementPodcast10. Click the link in the description below and sign up today. Esports is interesting because it's huge and it has grown so much, but I think that a lot of people still don't know what is esports and exactly what it includes. So if you would just give like a esport 101, like a very quick introduction to what is esports.
So imagine football. You have two teams with 11 players facing each other in a pitch, and they are taking part in a football game. Now, let's transfer that in esports. You have your arena, which is a virtual arena, consisted by characters controlled by players of opposing teams that are competing against each other for a prize, or in more recent years, as part of a league. So the similarities between esports and sports are all there. Most of the times they have the same format, and even the teams themselves have the same compositions. Like they have their active roster, they have the subs, they have their coaches, trainers, etc., etc. And on a practical level, I would say that it's about playing video games in a competitive manner. And I think that's the most bare bones explanation that I can give.
I see. I know that you have referred to it as competitive gaming in the past instead of esports.
Yeah, I prefer that term a lot, to be honest. And there has been a resurgence of that term, which makes me very happy, to be honest.
Correct me if I'm wrong here, but I feel like when esports started, it was games like Dota, Call of Duty, Counter-Strike. Nowadays, larger sports organizations are also entering esports. For example, football teams, Formula E.
Yeah.
How important do you think that this is for the sport of esport, that regular sports, so to speak, are entering the esports market?
I think that this is a very good step for bringing esports to the mainstream. But I, as a person that's coming from esports, I cannot help but think that at this point in time, and with the whole COVID situation going around the world, I think that sports need esports more than esports actually need sports. Because if esports has shown something during these times, is the fact that it can endure. Because of the format and the fact that it's carried out in an online manner, it can rapidly shift from a spectacle where audiences need to be present to something that can be watched online without much effort, at least from the audience's perspective. I know for a fact that a lot of the tournament organizers are still working very hard and have worked very hard in order to readopt an online model. And going forward, I think that we will see more involvement from contemporary and mainstream sports with esports, whether that would be more clubs getting involved or more leagues, but also more athletes as well. Because I think there is a trend that sports athletes are embracing the fact that they are also influencers on their own right, which is very ingrained in the esports market.
You mean from that they are investing in esports, or that they are playing themselves, or what do you mean?
To answer your question, I see that there is a trend of mainstream sports athletes that have been increasingly getting involved in playing games and streaming games. Not all of them have invested in any sort of esports venture, but almost all of them have broadcasted their gameplay live, and they are trying to embrace a new role of them being people that are being followed for their gaming habits, and their gameplay. I feel like this has not been explored in sports all that much. The fact that each player is its own influencer, and as such, they can create a lot more content or branding opportunities for sports clubs and for themselves.
I think the trend goes that way, though, that even for other athletes from football, etc., that they are becoming more influencers, but maybe that's more common in esports.
Yeah, I think that, as I said before, it's ingrained in the philosophy of esports, the fact that there are many examples, to be honest, of players being followed around and the loyalty lying with the player/influencer rather than the team that he was playing at. I think that one of the more recent examples could be Reckles. From a personal experience, I mean, I am a fan of Reckles, and I was watching Fnatic because of him. And then when he joined G2, I was not very keen on the idea at first, but then I just shifted my viewing habits towards watching the G2 games more.
I see.
And then not fighting my girlfriend as much because she was with G2 when I was with Fnatic.
I see.
We had something like a rivalry going on.
I see. Something else like a controversy around esports is however it should be categorized as a sport or not. For you, who has been involved with the industry now for 10 years, is that important to you that esport is considered a sport?
I think that we should let esports define itself and find its own way of defining itself. The market is still in a very early stage, and I don't think that we have properly explored everything that it has to offer yet. So I agree with that everyone co-adopted the term esports in order to make it easier for the mainstream to understand the phenomenon. But I think that if we allow esports to define itself, then we might gain more insight into it and the ecosystem and the teams and how everything is going forward.
So you feel like it's a strong enough product that it's not dependent on to be a part of sports, that it's strong enough to be its own thing?
I think that it is because it has a proven ability of attracting the attention of the younger populace and the younger demographics, which by itself means that it has a lot of power to move a lot of the younger people towards any end. So I feel like the esports product has a lot of potential still, and it has a lot of power due to the fact that it can attract the attention of the younger populace, which the more contemporary or mainstream sports can't. At the end of the day, esports have become big enough in order to be able to survive without being associated with sports. They appeal to a different generation and a different demographic.
And talking about esports is with the physical activity, that the kids are now playing video games and esports instead of, for example, being out doing something more physical. Do you see this as a problem, or do you see that there are other benefits of esports?
So for this answer, I will leave outside the fact that esports or playing video games has a proven ability to enhance cognitive abilities and hand-eye coordination and reaction times, etc., etc. I will say that whoever sees my picture on your cover for the announcement of the podcast can see that I have not exactly taken the physical road or the healthier road, but there is a shift in the market that calls for more physical exercise. The teams themselves also have physical trainers, and they have all sorts of chefs and dietitians and nutritionists, and everyone is trying to promote a healthier lifestyle, since it was and it is still one of the main arguments that someone has against playing video games. And you can see that throughout the world, there are a lot of teams that are trying to embrace that shift, and they are trying to openly point their followers towards it, to a healthier lifestyle, and to, bringing in physical exercise and proper nutrition into their daily lives.
That's very good, and I feel like that's a step in the right direction. And there are benefits of esports, as you said, hand-eye coordination and reaction times. Also your cognitive function. So if you take that and you implement also a physical training to that, I think that's very good.
Yeah, I certainly agree. And I really hope that as time passes by, this will be a bigger sentiment among all teams and leagues. The fact that we should promote physical activity and nutrition as much as possible. A healthier lifestyle is a better lifestyle. And I also will embrace it at some point when I have the time, probably.
Sounds good. If we talk about the industry a little broader, esports can be traced back to 1972, but it really boomed in the 2000s. What do you think caused this? Except for the obvious with the internet.
I think that, yes, the internet was one of the biggest reasons. However, esports, actually competitive gaming, has its roots in our nature. As human beings, we need to be competitive. We need to show and display actively that we are better than someone else. And at some point, some game designers caught on to that fact, and they tried to incorporate, leaderboards and stuff. But I think that the most contributing factor in the explosion of the esports phenomenon was live streaming. The fact that whoever could organize a game tournament, and that anyone around the world had the ability to view it. And that instantly became marketable. And this created a very big shift, which, brought about the explosion of esports as we know it right now. The world is more interconnected than ever before, and esports are very much capitalizing on that fact.
And you mentioned it briefly before with the streaming and that esport is its own thing and so on. But how has esports been affected by the pandemic?
As with anything else, if you have a yearly plan of certain in-person events that people can attend and pay tickets for, and then these spaces can also be monetized in various ways, then you will be losing some revenue, and probably you will be losing a lot of revenue. However, many organizers were able to shift to an online model and then somehow salvage their advertisement deals through carrying out more, let's say, online tournaments with the prominent teams as they were. And it didn't also help the tournament organizers, but it also helped the teams, because if they had no place to compete in, then they also would have problems with their sponsors and their monetization. So I guess that this speaks a lot about the perseverance of esports, and also about the agility that permeates the market, the fact that they can shift to another business model really easily and fast.
Yeah, and I mean, esports have become such a large industry, and I see numbers from 2 years ago when esports was a $1.1 billion industry, and which was a 15% increase from the year before that. So where do you think that most of the money comes from? And how do you think that it became this popular?
In esports, most of the revenue comes from sponsorships. I think that we are on the verge of changing that because the pie chart between the revenue streams for esports and sports is the same, but the allocations are different. In esports, most of the revenue, as I said, comes from sponsorships. And then, if I recall correctly, it would be the other categories like media rights and merchandise, etc., etc. However, with the recent paradigms of, the Overwatch League that was selling media rights to platforms, and also the things that Riot Games is doing with their products as well, like selling the media rights to Twitch.tv, we are seeing a shift in the model, and which I would hope that more team organizers would be following soon, because one of the key reasons that a lot of teams didn't go very far is their inability to create revenue. And since their revenue and since most of the revenue could come from sponsorships, that meant that only the more competitive teams or the more successful teams could have access to bigger sponsorships or even sponsorships for that matter. Yeah, so I feel like we are on the cusp of change on that regard, and I am very excited to see what happens next.
Me too. If we look on gender equality, I find that topic very interesting, especially in esports, since usually there is a male dominance of active players, or it has been due to the physical differences of men and women. But I feel like this doesn't really apply for esports. So is it a more gender equal sport, you would say, in terms of active players?
To be honest, esports has a story of being gender locked to more male audiences. However, in the recent years, there has been a lot of change, and there have been a lot of people around the world that have actively promoting and advocating gender equality in esports. I would love to see a future where female gamers and male gamers, or gamers of any orientation, can all play together and compete with each other freely and openly in any sort of game. I think that we are moving towards that future, and we will probably reach that sooner than other more mainstream markets or sports.
It's definitely a step in the right direction, and I feel like esport has all the opportunities in the world to become more gender equal on that point.
Yeah, for sure.
Talking about esports, I guess there are a lot of young people today who would like to enter the esport market, maybe as a player or maybe from a business standpoint. What would be your advice to these people who wants to pursue an esports career?
You know, when I tried to join, when I was working towards joining the esports market or trying to find a job in the esports market, everything was so small scale that your only thought would be to build decent CV, no matter how much free labor you would do. But in the later years, there have been so many investments in the market, and there have been so many companies that now can give opportunities to educate people to join their ranks, even having little to no experience in esports. Because on a base level, the positions and the jobs, the vocations that are in esports are no different from what you can encounter in sports or any other business in that regard. I mean, there are your sponsors managers, your business development managers, your project managers, etc., etc. So having a background in the market and an understanding always helps. So if we are talking about people that are coming out of a university having studied something relating to business, I would probably suggest getting educated in the market and maybe get an internship in esports, maybe in a team or a company that will be asking for internships. I think that most of the bigger teams now have internships open and they are receiving applications. So, this is a very interesting moment in history for the people that want to get into the esports market directly.
Yeah, I agree with you. Internships are always a great way to enter a market. And in an earlier episode of the podcast, we were talking to Nina Wennerström from Esport agency. And I know from a previous time that you and I spoke that there are actually Esports-specific sport agencies today.
Yeah, of course. Esports agencies, they do exist. Most of them, they are trying to widen their range by incorporating more gaming-related influencers, streamers, or content creators. But there are also agencies that are really focused on esports and esports streaming, as well as esports players, representing them and finding them, their next steps in their careers or new sponsorship deals and whatnot.
I find that very interesting that they saw this gap in the market with esports and they jumped on it.
Yeah, of course.
Approaching the end of the interview here, is there something that I haven't asked you that you feel would be important to mention with regards to either your career or for esports?
To be honest, the questions were really great for in order to get someone to understand at least the basics of esports. So yeah, I don't think that there is a lot of other things to say, at least on a basic level. I am, of course, always happy to facilitate any and all conversations that are deeper in the esports market. So yeah, this is me low-key extending another invitation to you for a more in-depth conversation down the line.
Sounds good. And it also leads me to the second question here. If you could choose my next guest on this podcast, or maybe someone else from the esports world, who do you think that I should talk to?
Since you were so interested in sport-specific agencies, I would tell you to visit Prodigy Agency and ask for Jerome. I think that he is one of the people that can really provide a lot of insight in the inner workings of an esports agency that represents the top-of-the-line talent currently in the esports market.
That sounds really interesting, and definitely I will reach out to Jerome and see if we can make that happen.
Awesome.
Dimitris, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the Sports Management Podcast and teaching us more about the esports.
Thank you for inviting me. And I do hope to see you soon again in Greece at some point.
Yes, we will do.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Sports Management Podcast. Do you have thoughts or ideas about this podcast, or do you know someone that I should interview next? Please reach out to me on sportsmpodcast@gmail.com or visit my website sportsmanagementpodcast.com. If you prefer social media, you can find me on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram @sportsmpodcast.